Black billionaire girl's seat stolen by white passenger moments. Later, entire flight delayed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The cabin was quiet until his voice ripped through it like a blade. "Hey, this seat isn't yours, kid. Go back where you belong." The man didn't whisper. He didn't care who heard. Dressed in a crisp white shirt, one hand clutching a crinkling bag of chips, he leaned back like a king in a stolen throne. His polished shoe pressed forward arrogant, heavy planting itself against the small girl in front of him. The black leather made contact with her white dress, as if the contrast was intentional, a performance for the rows of passengers now staring. A gasp rippled from somewhere behind. Heads turned. The air, once filled with the low hum of engines and quiet conversations, became charged. The girl said nothing. She stood there, small frame steady, hands at her side. Her braids framed a face calm beyond her years, eyes locked on the man who had just declared she didn't belong. Passengers exchanged uneasy looks. A woman across the aisle whispered, "Is anyone going to stop him?" But no one moved. The man smirked, chewing loudly, crumbs gathering at the corner of his mouth. "Sweetheart," he added, dragging the word like an insult, "economy's that way. This row's not for you." His tone wasn't protective. It was ownership. The child didn't flinch, didn't cry. She had heard voices like his before, in classrooms, in stores, in places where she was told she had wandered into the wrong space. But here, at 30,000 feet, surrounded by adults who watched, but said nothing, the humiliation was sharper. And yet, she stood. Still. 2 rows back, a younger passenger shifted, phone raised just enough to capture the scene. A red record light glowed like a quiet witness. The man noticed and laughed. "Oh, record it," he said, waving his bag of chips like a prop. "Show the world what happens when people try to sneak where they don't belong." He leaned back deeper, his foot pressing harder into the child's space, daring her to protest. She didn't move. She didn't need to. The silence was heavier than any outburst. That was when the cabin truly felt it, the shift. The weight of bias, of entitlement, thick in the air like turbulence. A storm, and everyone could sense it breaking. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The girl's eyes, unblinking, met the man's. For a flicker of a second, something in his grin faltered. He didn't know why. He couldn't know. Not yet. But the truth was already on board this flight. And when it landed, the world watching would never forget how it began with a foot on a child's seat and a voice that said she didn't belong. She was 10 years old. That's all anyone in that cabin thought they saw. Just a child's skin, the color of polished mahogany, hair braided neatly, dressed in a simple white cotton dress that looked more Sunday morning than first-class boarding. No logo bag on her shoulder, no sparkling jewelry, no entourage hovering to prove she mattered. To strangers, she was only a girl standing frozen in the aisle, her seat stolen, her dignity questioned. But perception was a costume, and her silence, her calm, steady silence, wasn't weakness, it was armor. She had been taught this silence since she could remember. At 5, when a teacher assumed she couldn't possibly be the daughter of the woman in the black Rolls-Royce waiting outside the school gates. At 7, when a hotel clerk asked if she was lost while she held a key card to the penthouse her mother owned. At 9, when security followed her through a luxury store while ignoring her actual nanny walking behind. Each time, her mother's words echoed like a steady drum. "Don't rush to prove yourself. Truth reveals itself when patience holds." Now, patience held her like a seatbelt locked tight. She didn't need to scream for the cabin's attention. The man's shoe pressed into her space was already the loudest accusation. In row 4, a young woman shifted nervously, whispering to her husband, "Why won't the crew do anything?" Her husband only shrugged, eyes darting away, afraid of being the one to speak up. At the front of the plane, a flight attendant's polished smile wavered as she caught the scene. But when the man waved her over, pointing at the child like she was baggage misplaced in the wrong section, the attendant hesitated. She saw only the dress, the age, the absence of status symbols. And she believed him. "Young lady," the attendant said with manufactured sweetness, "let's find you another seat in economy. This area is reserved." The girl blinked slowly, unflinching. She did not move, because this seat was hers, paid in full, booked under her legal name. Not by mistake, not by privilege, but by right, and not just any right, her birthright. If the cabin had known who she truly was, the air would have shifted instantly, because she wasn't just a child on a plane. She was the only daughter of Amara Cole, billionaire founder of Cole Aviation Group, the very conglomerate that held a controlling stake in this airline. Every row of this aircraft existed under her family's ownership. Every polished wing outside the window bore the weight of contracts signed in her mother's hand. But none of that showed on her face now. She didn't need it to. She let the silence stretch, let the arrogance of the man beside her rot in its own echo. Around them, murmurs rose like static before a storm. Phones lifted discreetly, lenses glinting in the overhead lights. The girl breathed slowly, evenly. To the world, she was a child out of place. To those who knew better, she was exactly where she belonged. And very soon, the cabin was going to learn the difference. The aisle narrowed as authority approached. Black heels clicked against the cabin floor, each step puncturing the hush that had fallen over row 6. A senior flight attendant mid-40s, hair pinned tight, uniform pressed sharp slit into view. Her badge read, Chief Purser. Her posture carried the air of command. "What seems to be the problem here?" she asked, though her eyes weren't on the man with his foot stretched arrogantly across the seat. They were on the girl. The man didn't miss a beat. He gestured with his chip bag, crumbs flaring into the aisle. "This kid is loitering where she doesn't belong. I told her economy is that way." He chuckled, emboldened now by the attendant's presence. "Glad you came. Handle this." The attendant's lips pressed into something that looked like a smile but wasn't. She crouched slightly, voice pitched low as if speaking to someone fragile. "Sweetheart, this isn't your section. Let's find you another seat. Come with me." The girl's gaze didn't flicker. No step forward, no retreat, just that calm stare, unblinking, holding both of them in place. Around them, murmurs started rippling again. A young passenger in row 7 whispered into his phone, "They're moving her? But that's her seat." Another voice chimed in sharper, "Why aren't they asking him to move?" But authority had already chosen its target. The attendant straightened, eyes narrowing. "Miss, you can't stand here. You're disrupting boarding. Please cooperate." The man leaned back with smug satisfaction, stretching his legs further, his shoe nearly pressing into the girl's stomach now. "See? Even the crew knows you don't belong." He winked at the purser. "Thanks for handling this. People need to learn their place." Gasps traveled down the row. A woman clutched her handbag tighter. A teenager mouthed, "Unbelievable." The girl inhaled once, slow and steady, then released it like a thread of steel, still silent, still calm. But silence was louder than shouting now. It exposed the imbalance, the grown man reclining in stolen comfort, the uniformed authority siding with him, and the child standing alone. The injustice was a mirror, and everyone watching saw their own reflection in it. "Ma'am," a passenger 3 rows back finally spoke up, "that's her seat. I saw her ticket." His voice was firm, but the attendant whipped around instantly, tone clipped. "Sir, stay out of this. We'll resolve it." Resolve it. 2 words sharpened like a blade, but pointed in only one direction. The man laughed again, crunching another handful of chips. "Hear that? Resolved." He tapped his shoe against the seat edge, claiming it fully. "Back to economy, little one. End of story." But it wasn't the end. It was the spark. Because in that moment, as the girl stood still and the purser reached for the intercom to summon security, the cabin felt it. The escalation, the tightening of air, the unmistakable sense that something larger than a seat assignment was unfolding here. And none of them, not the man, not the crew, not the silent witnesses clutching their phones, had the faintest idea who they were really pushing against. The cabin braced for an outburst. But it never came. No scream, no protest, no frantic plea from the small girl standing at row 6. Only stillness. She didn't clutch her dress. She didn't fold into herself like so many expected. Instead, her chin lifted a fraction, her eyes steady, her breath even like a tree rooted in the middle of a storm. Passengers glanced between one another, uneasy. It was the silence that unsettled them most. A silence too composed for a child accused of trespassing in first class, too deliberate for someone being told she didn't belong. The man with the chip bag smirked wider, mistaking quiet for surrender. "That's what I thought," he said, shaking crumbs onto the carpet. "Knows her place after all." His laugh rang out, sharp, cheap, bouncing against the cabin walls. The chief purser adjusted her blazer, satisfied. She reached for the intercom, voice low but firm. "We may need security at row 6. Possible non-compliant passenger." Non-compliant. A word usually reserved for threats, for dangers, now applied to a 10-year-old girl standing in her own seat. Still, she didn't move. She let the word hang. She let it weigh itself down. In the stillness, her mind flickered not to fear, but to memory. A hotel lobby 2 years ago, where a clerk tried to pull her mother's black card out of her hand, claiming it was fake. A boutique where alarms followed her, not because they rang, but because eyes did. A classroom where a substitute called her by the wrong name 3 times before finally asking, "Are you sure you belong in this group?" Each moment carved patience into her bones, and now patience held her here. The murmurs in the cabin grew restless. A young man across the aisle whispered into his phone camera. "She hasn't said a word. She's just standing there. This is wrong." His recording light blinked like a witness no one could silence. The girl's gaze never left the man lounging in her seat. He shifted slightly under it, though he didn't know why. Something in her eyes, too calm, too knowing, scratched at the edges of his certainty. The purser leaned down again, voice clipped. "Miss, don't make this harder. If you refuse to move, you'll be escorted off this aircraft." Escorted. Off her family's plane. The girl blinked once, slow. No flinch, no word. The silence swelled, heavy, undeniable. It wasn't submission. It was something else, something waiting. Passengers could feel it now, even if they couldn't name it. This wasn't the stillness of fear. It was the stillness of a tide drawing back before it crashes. And though the man grinned, though the crew pushed, though the tension clawed higher, she remained anchored. Quiet, steady, patient, because silence, she knew, could be the sharpest blade of all. The first phone lifted almost quietly, like a candle lit in the dark. Row 7, aisle seat, a young man in a hoodie tilted his camera toward the scene. The red record light blinked, small but defiant. "She hasn't said a word," he whispered into the mic, barely audible above the hum of the engines. "That man took her seat, and now they're calling security on her." His voice cracked, disbelief carrying more weight than volume. Across the aisle, a woman in her 30s leaned forward, eyebrows drawn tight. "Is anyone else seeing this? She hasn't done anything," she murmured, though loud enough for nearby rows to catch. A ripple spread. Passengers glanced up from magazines, from tablets, from the safety of ignoring. Now eyes locked on the standoff at row 6. The man in the white shirt, suddenly enjoying an audience, raised his voice. "Yup, go ahead and film. Show the world what happens when freeloaders try to sneak into first class." He crunched another chip, brushing crumbs onto the girl's dress as though marking his territory. Gasps scattered. A woman 2 rows back hissed, "Did he just?" Another shook her head in disbelief. Still, the girl stood silent, rooted. The chief purser pressed the intercom again, sharper this time. "Security to gate. We have a refusal to comply." The words buzzed through the speakers. Sterile, official, but to those listening, they carried the taste of injustice. In row 4, a teenager tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, why aren't they stopping him? He's the one in the wrong seat." The mother bit her lip, eyes flicking nervously toward the uniformed crew. "Because sometimes they choose who to believe before they know the truth." More phones came out now. 3, then 5, then nearly a dozen small lenses tilted toward the confrontation. A quiet chorus of digital witnesses, each one a potential jury. The man scoffed, louder still. "What? You think your little videos are going to change anything? She's not supposed to be here, end of story." But the story wasn't ending, it was unraveling. Passengers shifted in their seats, tension thick as the recycled air. A low murmur built, questions spilling between rows. Why are they moving her? Didn't she have a ticket? Are they serious right now? One voice rose above the whispers. A younger woman near the window stood halfway, phone clutched tight. "I saw her boarding pass. It scanned green. That's her seat." The purser snapped her head toward the witness, eyes cold. "Ma'am, please sit down. Do not interfere." But the word interfere only made the silence heavier. Because interference wasn't the problem. Indifference was. And now, indifference was cracking. The girl hadn't moved, not an inch. The man's grin faltered for just a second, as if the weight of so many eyes unsettled him. He masked it with another laugh, louder than before. Look at her just standing there, pathetic. Yet, to everyone else watching, that silence was no longer weakness. It was resistance. And as the phones kept rolling, the cabin itself seemed to lean closer, waiting for the storm they all knew was coming. The intercom clicked off. A hush followed, but it didn't last. Down the aisle came another figure, sharper uniform, gold wings pinned above her pocket, voice already coiled like a whip. The senior service manager. Authority in heels, she stopped at row 6, eyes cutting across the child first. Then the man sprawled with crumbs on his lap. Yet when she spoke, her judgment was instant and one-sided. "What is going on here?" she demanded, though her tone carried no curiosity. It was already a verdict. The man pointed casually with his chip bag, as if tossing evidence into her hands. "This kid's trying to sneak into first class. Took me 5 minutes to get a flight attendant to notice. Glad you're here." The manager's gaze lingered on the girl's white dress, the absence of designer logos, the way she stood alone. It was all the confirmation she thought she needed. "Miss," she said, her voice flat but sharp enough to cut, "you need to leave this cabin immediately. This area is for paying passengers, not stowaways." Gasps erupted. Phones tilted higher. The word stowaway snapped through the air like static. A passenger 2 rows away muttered, "She didn't just say that." Another hissed, "She called a child a stowaway?" The girl remained still, eyes unblinking, the silence steady as iron. But the man basked in it. He laughed, clapping once like an audience of one. "Hear that? Even she knows you don't belong. Go on, sweetheart, run back to economy before they drag you there." The manager's patience thinned, her voice rising just enough for the cabin to hear. "We will not tolerate disruptions. Security has been called. If you don't comply, you will be removed from this aircraft." Removed. Not him. Her. Phones buzzed with disbelief. One passenger whispered into their mic, "They're calling security on a child. This is insane." The man leaned back, folding his arms smugly, legs still stretched across the stolen seat. "Problem solved," he sneered. But it wasn't solved. It was spiraling. The girl's stillness now looked less like compliance and more like defiance. The silence felt heavier, purposeful, drawing the entire cabin's focus into a single point, her refusal to vanish. And then came the final sting. The manager crouched lower, eyes narrowed, voice dripping with venom meant to pierce. "Little girl, stop pretending. You don't belong in first class. You never did." That line cracked the air. Passengers gasped openly, some shaking their heads, others lifting phones higher, recording without shame. A mother covered her child's ears. A man muttered, "Unbelievable. She's humiliating her in front of everyone." The cabin was no longer neutral. It was charged, divided authority on one side, truth on the other. And at the center stood the girl, unmoving, unbroken. The storm was no longer approaching. It was here. The cabin's tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. The service manager's hand shot out, fast and deliberate. Without warning, she snatched the boarding pass clutched in the girl's small hand. The thin slip of paper, her proof, her right, her place was torn from her fingers like contraband. The girl didn't resist. She didn't reach to pull it back. She only stood, watching, as the manager unfolded it with a dramatic flick, eyes scanning, lips curling. "This is counterfeit," she declared, voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "We've seen this trick before. Fake prints, cheap paper. Security will deal with you." And then, with a motion both theatrical and cruel, she ripped the boarding pass straight down the middle. The sound paper, splitting clean, echoed louder than it should have, like fabric tearing in a cathedral. Gasps rippled through the rows. A woman near the window covered her mouth. A man muttered, "That was her ticket. She just destroyed her ticket." The man lounging in the stolen seat threw his head back, laughing. "Perfect. Now she's got nothing. No pass, no seat, no proof. Guess it's economy or off the plane entirely." He leaned forward, voice dripping with triumph. "Told you. You don't belong." The child's eyes dropped briefly to the torn fragments fluttering toward the floor. She didn't bend to pick them up. She didn't flinch. Only lifted her gaze again, calm, unshaken, as though the act of destruction meant nothing. But for the witnesses, it meant everything. Phones angled closer. Voices grew louder. "Did she just tear up a kid's boarding pass?" Someone whispered. "That's theft." That's fraud. The manager wasn't finished. She signaled to the purser beside her, who grabbed the girl's small backpack resting on the seat's edge. With a rough tug, she yanked it free, holding it high like contraband seized in a raid. "Security will search this," she announced coldly. "And until they arrive, you are not permitted to sit here." A low chorus of outrage simmered. A passenger called out, "That's a child's bag. What are you doing?" Another shouted, "You can't just take her things." The manager ignored them. She placed the backpack on the service cart, zipped it shut with a snap, and barked into her radio. "Gate security. Respond immediately. Possible fraudulent passenger. Row 6. The words fraudulent passenger burned hotter than fire. Passengers stirred, some rising halfway from their seats, some filming openly now. The cabin had become a stage, and every act was uglier than the last. Through it all, the girl stood still, her silence unbroken, her presence unwavering. She didn't need to fight for her ticket. She didn't need to snatch back her bag, because what was being stolen couldn't be taken by hands, it was dignity. And dignity, once lost, had a way of burning everything around it. The man grinned wider, stretching in his stolen comfort. "Security's on the way. Finally. End of this nonsense." But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this wasn't the end. It was the breaking point. And breaking points are where power shifts. The backpack sat zipped on the service cart. The boarding pass lay in 2 torn pieces on the floor. The cabin buzzed with restless voices, phones still recording, disbelief thick in the air. The girl moved for the first time. Not toward the man, not toward the manager. Instead, she reached calmly into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a slim, black phone. Small in her hands, but weighted with something none of them could name. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look at the crew still hovering above her. She pressed one button. The line clicked alive. A woman's voice came through, steady, resonant, familiar only to her. "Baby, talk to me." The girl spoke softly, but each word landed like stone against glass. "It's happening again." Around her, passengers exchanged looks. "Again?" The man frowned, suddenly uneasy. The manager folded her arms, unimpressed. "Who are you calling, little girl? Your mother can't fix this. Security is already on the way." The child ignored her. She held the phone closer. "They took my seat, tore my ticket. They have my bag." On the other end, silence stretched for one sharp second. Then the voice returned, calm but cutting. "Stay where you are. Do not move. I'm on this flight too." The cabin froze. The girl's eyes flicked up, unblinking. "Which row?" "First class," the voice replied. "I'll be there in less than a minute." Gasps scattered like sparks. Passengers leaned in, whispers spreading fast. "She's on this flight? Who's her mother?" The manager scoffed, masking unease. "Enough games. Hand me that phone right now." She reached, but the girl stepped back just once, out of reach. "No," the child said simply, her first word spoken aloud since it began. Quiet, but unyielding. The sound of that single syllable cut through the cabin, stronger than any scream. The man shifted in his seat, his smirk faltering. "Wait, who exactly are you calling?" The girl didn't answer. She didn't need to. The voice on the line was already moving. Footsteps were coming. At the front of the plane, the curtain separating first class rustled. A silhouette appeared, then parted the fabric with measured calm. Heels struck the aisle like a gavel, deliberate, unstoppable. Heads turned. Passengers lifted their phones higher. The storm everyone had felt was finally breaking. And with every step closer, the balance of power in that cabin was beginning to shift, away from arrogance, away from injustice, and toward a reckoning none of them could avoid. The curtain drew back. She appeared not with fury, but with presence measured, commanding. A tall black woman in a tailored navy suit, heels clicking against the aisle floor, eyes sharp as glass. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Every step announced itself. The passengers hushed, phones tilted higher, the red lights blinking like constellations in the dimmed cabin. The service manager froze, hands still hovering near the girl's backpack. The man in the stolen seat blinked rapidly, suddenly unsure of his posture. The woman reached row 6 and stopped. She looked first at her daughter, eyes softening, a subtle nod passing between them, an exchange of reassurance that spoke volumes. Then she turned. Her gaze swept over the manager, the purser, and finally landed on the man still lounging with crumbs scattered across his shirt. Her voice came calm, deliberate, and devastating. "You told my daughter she doesn't belong here." The words cut the air like a blade. No shouting, no raised tone, just truth delivered with the certainty of ownership. The man tried to laugh, weak and unsteady now. Ma'am, this isn't about race. She didn't have a ticket. He gestured at the shredded slip on the carpet. That proves it. The woman's eyes didn't leave him. That was her ticket. You tore it. And that was her seat. You stole it. Murmurs swelled, passengers shifting, whispers cascading down the aisle. She knows the details. She saw it. The manager cleared her throat, attempting authority. Ma'am, please return to your seat in first class. We are handling this. The woman turned slowly, fixing her gaze on the uniformed attendant. A long pause followed. Then, with surgical precision, you are not handling this. You are escalating it. And you did it in front of 50 witnesses, all recording. Gasps, someone whispered. She's right. The manager faltered, but before she could speak again, the woman reached into her blazer pocket. She pulled out a sleek black badge, embossed with silver lettering. She held it steady for all to see. My name is Amara Cole, founder and chief executive officer of Cole Aviation Group. I own 40% of this airline. And you, every one of you standing against my child right now, answer to me. The cabin broke into audible shock. Passengers whispered louder now, some clapping hands over their mouths, others holding phones higher to catch every word. The man's smirk collapsed entirely. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His shoe slid back from the seat as if scorched. The service manager staggered half a step. You're the CEO? Amara didn't blink. The only one in this cabin with the authority to decide who belongs. And let me make it clear, my daughter belongs here more than you ever will. Phones caught every syllable, every pause, every drop of power. The balance of the cabin shifted in an instant. And for the first time since it began, the man and the crew realized this wasn't just a passenger, this was the owner. And the reckoning had only begun. The silence that followed Amara Cole's words was heavier than the roar of an engine. Phones hovered like a field of red eyes, unblinking, recording every breath. The man in the stolen seat shifted, his swagger gone. His shoe slipped off the edge, retreating to the floor like a trespasser caught in the act. His bag of chips crinkled loudly in his trembling hand, the sound clumsy and pathetic compared to the authority standing before him. He tried to laugh, but the sound broke halfway. Look, I didn't know. You thought wrong. Amara cut in, her voice flat, final. The service manager's face drained of color. Her grip tightened on the girl's backpack until her knuckles whitened, then loosened abruptly as though the fabric had burned her. She set it back on the seat with shaking hands, stammering, Ma'am, I wasn't informed. I didn't realize. You realized enough to call my child a stowaway, Amara replied, eyes like steel. The purser lowered her gaze to the floor, lips pressed tight. Authority had evaporated, leaving only shame in its place. Around them, the passengers erupted not in chaos, but in justice. Applause cracked from the back row, sharp and deliberate. Then another pair of hands joined, then another, until the cabin filled with clapping that drowned out excuses. She's the CEO? One man whispered into his phone camera, his voice trembling with awe. They tried to humiliate her kid, and she owns the airline. A woman across the aisle shook her head, furious but vindicated. I knew it. I knew that was her seat. The man in the stolen chair leaned forward, desperate. Listen, it was a mistake. I didn't mean. You meant every word, Amara said calmly. And every passenger here heard you. His face flushed red, his confidence shrinking under the weight of 50 witnesses and 1,000 cameras waiting beyond the upload button. The service manager tried one last attempt, her voice brittle. Miss Cole, perhaps we can resolve this quietly. Quietly? Amara's gaze pinned her. You tore my child's boarding pass. You seized her belongings. You humiliated her in front of an entire cabin. That is not quiet. That is systemic. And it ends tonight. The passengers clapped louder. A few stood, blocking the aisle as though forming a barrier between Amara and the crew that had turned against her daughter. The girl remained silent, steady, her eyes locked on her mother. For the first time, her stillness looked less like defense and more like inheritance. The man swallowed hard, shrinking back into the seat he had stolen, knowing it no longer belonged to him. The crew shifted uneasily, pale under the glow of dozens of recording screens. And in that moment, the cabin itself declared the verdict. Justice wasn't waiting for the ground. It had already landed. The applause simmered into silence again, waiting. All eyes fixed on Amara Cole, the woman who now held the cabin in her palm. She pulled her phone from her blazer, pressed a single contact. The line clicked instantly. "Nia," she said. Her voice was calm, steady. "Log this incident. Effective immediately." The cabin leaned closer. "I am suspending the senior service manager and the chief purser assigned to Flight 327. Freeze their credentials. Escort them from this aircraft before takeoff." Gasps cracked through the rows. The manager's face drained, her badge suddenly heavier than stone. "Ma'am, please," she stammered. But Amara didn't look at her. "You've humiliated my child. You've humiliated this airline. You no longer have the privilege of serving its passengers." Her phone buzzed. Nia's voice came crisp and clear. "Confirmed. Credentials revoked. Security notified." The manager's badge beeped red against the scanner at the galley wall. She froze, staring at it as though it had betrayed her. The purser's badge followed, blinking once, then dying. Their authority vanished in a blink, and everyone saw it. Passengers gasped, then clapped again, louder, sharper. Amara turned, her gaze landing on the man still slouched in the stolen seat. "As for you," she said evenly, "you're leaving this plane." His head snapped up. "Wait, what? You can't?" "I can," she interrupted, "and I will." The air tightened. He sputtered, desperate, his earlier arrogance collapsing into panic. "Please, it was a mistake. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," Amara cut him off, her voice flat as steel. "You told my child she didn't belong on a plane she owns. That was your last mistake." Two security officers appeared from the front, drawn by her command and the clamor of witnesses. Without hesitation, they moved down the aisle. The man scrambled, voice cracking. "Come on! It was a joke!" His words disintegrated under the weight of 50 phones pointed at him, recording every second. The officers reached him, firm hands on his shoulders. He struggled weakly, but resistance was pointless. Passengers shifted aside as he was pulled from the seat he had stolen, dragged toward the exit. Every step he took down the aisle was a reversal. Arrogance turned to disgrace, entitlement turned to exile. The cabin erupted in applause again, louder this time, rolling like thunder through the narrow space. Someone shouted, "Justice!" Another yelled, "That's what power looks like." The man's voice vanished behind the curtain, swallowed by the silence he once mocked. Amara lowered her phone, placed it calmly back in her pocket. Her gaze swept the cabin one last time. The power had shifted, completely. The aisle was clear now. The man who had stolen a child's seat was gone, escorted out under the weight of 50 recording phones and a silence louder than his protests. The purser and service manager sat stunned, badges dead in their hands, their authority dissolved like smoke. What remained was stillness. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of aftermath when justice lands. Amara Cole stood in the center of the cabin, tall, steady, her daughter beside her. She placed a hand gently on the girl's shoulder, and the child's silence finally broke, not with words, but with a breath of relief. Amara turned to face the passengers, her voice carrying without force, clear enough for every row. "Let me be absolutely clear. No child, my child, or anyone else's, should ever be told they don't belong. Not in this cabin, not in this airline, not in this world." The words resonated through the narrow space, more powerful than any announcement over the speakers. She glanced down at her daughter, then back at the sea of watching faces. "You all saw what happened. You all heard the words. And you all know the truth now. Justice doesn't need shouting. It doesn't need rage. It only needs to stand its ground and let the truth reveal itself." Applause burst again, this time not scattered but unified. A roar of hands that filled the plane like thunder. Some passengers stood, some wiped tears, others simply nodded, a recognition of something long overdue. Amara raised her hand gently, and the clapping softened into quiet again. Her last words fell into that hush like a gavel. "I don't need to record what happened here tonight. I am the result of it. My daughter is the result of it. And every person who ever tried to erase us only proved why we had to build higher. Remember that the next time you see a face you think doesn't belong." She stepped back, guiding her daughter into the reclaimed seat. The white dress brushed against the leather, finally where it was meant to be. The cabin exhaled, the tension dissolving into something else, respect, awe, and the undeniable truth that they had witnessed more than an incident. They had witnessed a reckoning. Phones lowered. Eyes remained fixed. For a brief moment, the hum of the engines carried something heavier than flight. It carried justice at 30,000 feet. And as Amara Cole settled into the seat beside her daughter, the message lingered in every heart on board. Dignity cannot be stolen. It can only be revealed.